Hello, family. We are now officially in Passover season, which will start this week. And I want to welcome you to just enter into the word today with me. We're not going to have music or anything like that. We're just going to break the word together. So if you are joining me online, I would love if you let me know where you're watching from. I love to see different people from different ethnic groups and people around different parts of the globe, whether you're in Africa or Europe or Asia or here in America. I want to welcome you to Convergence Experience. This is more than a church service, this is more than us coming together as believers, but it's even us uniting to worship God and to hear what God may be speaking to each of our hearts together, and and hear our stories from one another of how God is moving in our lives. So today, if you have a testimony, you got something to celebrate that God's doing, maybe in India or Pakistan or Nepal or Bangladesh. If you have a testimony from Nigeria, Uganda, you have a testimony from East Africa and Kenya or Tanzania or in Somalia, or different regions. I have friends in Zambia and South Africa. Wherever you are today, we all serve the same God. And it is just so encouraging and inspiring and transformative to hear your stories and your journey. For those that maybe want to partner with us, I know that my inbox is full of people from different nations that are saying, Pastor Jade, I want to partner with you. I want to be a Convergence church or ministry, or I just want to be in fellowship with other believers around the world. I would love to hear from you. All you have to do is email me if you don't get a message back, because I am so sorry, but I am very busy right now, and this is not an excuse, but I have not got to all of my messages yet. But email is a lot better. So if you email convergencesm@gmail.com, and I'll put that on the screen, convergencesm@gmail.com. Then we would love to get back with you and just communicate with you and find a way to uh, come together and fellowship with you and connect you with our movement. So that's convergencesm at gmail. And either I or someone from our team will contact you back. So I want to make sure that everyone knows that that's the easiest way to get a hold of us. All right. I love you all. And today I'm going to share a message that's really interesting. God gave me a really interesting title. And I want to invite your attention to Joshua chapter 2. So I'm turning there in my Bible. And if you have a Bible with you, I would love for you to open with me to the word of the Lord together. Again, that is Exodus chapter 2, verse 1. We're going to start at 1, and then we're going to end with verse 11. Again, comment in the comments if you're here. Let us know you're here, your name, where you're from. And especially if you're in ministry or you have a job somewhere, we'd love to hear what you do. Joshua chapter 2, verse 1 through 11. This is the word of the Lord. After this, Joshua the son of Nun sent out 2 young men from Acacia Grove to spy out the land, saying, "Go and see the land and Jericho." So the 2 young men went and entered Jericho, and they went into the house of a harlot named Rahab and lodged there. Verse 2, this was reported to the king of Jericho, saying, "Behold, men from the sons of Israel have come to spy on the land." So the king of Jericho sent and spoke to Rahab, saying, "Bring out the men who came into your house last night, for they are here to spy on the land." Verse 4, but the woman took the men and hid them, and she spoke to them, saying, "The men came to me, but as the gate was being shut in the darkness, the men went out. I do not know where they went. Pursue them, if indeed you may overtake them." Verse 6, but she, Rahab, led them to the roof and hid them in the stalk of flax she had piled together on the roof. So the men searched for them along the road to the Jordan, to the fords, and the gate was closed. Then it came to pass, when the men who pursued them went after them, and before the spies went to sleep, that she went to them on the roof, and she said, I know the Lord gave you the land, for fear of you has fallen us. Verse 10. For we heard that the Lord dried up the Red Sea before you when you came out of the land of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and to Og, whom you utterly destroyed. Verse 11. So when we heard it, we were amazed in our heart, and there was no longer any spirit in any of us because of your presence. For your God is in heaven above and on earth below. And I'll go ahead and read 12. Now, therefore, swear to me by the Lord that as I showed you mercy, you shall also be merciful to me and my father's house, and capture alive all my house, my father, my mother, my brothers, and everything they have, and deliver my soul from death. That's Joshua chapter 2, 1 through 12. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Joshua chapter 2, verse 1 through 12. The grass withers, the flower falls, but the word of the Lord remains forever. Today, the title of this message is When Prostitutes Become Saints. And this is going to be a series on prostitutes in the Bible. I'm not sure if anyone's preached a series like that before, so it should be a very interesting journey that we're going to go through together of people that we see as prostitutes, but God sees as God's special messengers. How are you remembered? Are you remembered for your past primarily? Are you remembered for your failures? Are you remembered for your imperfections or your needs? Each one of us is remembered for something. And depending on who's remembering you, the story may sound different. Some may remember you for the past, for a certain season of your life, for 2 or 3 years, 8 years, 5 years of your life. Some people remember you from who you were as a child, that little rambunctious little boy or little girl or shy little child. And people have a tendency to keep you held where they remember you. But God doesn't keep us in our past, or keep us in a season of our life, or keep us in one decision of our life. How do people see you? Do they see you for who you really are? The reality is that none of us is one-dimensional. We are complex, beautiful, intricate creations of God, desiring to overcome in a fallen world. If you understand the Greek mentality, it was very dichotomous. So there was a separation between the natural world and the spiritual world, between the seen and the unseen. Whereas when you look throughout Africa and other areas, the unseen blends with the seen, and everything doesn't have to be this or that, us versus them. There can actually be a blending of all things. And because of that, we find that we have been so influenced, especially in the Western world, by this dichotomous way of seeing people and situations and circumstances, that it can create a lot of conflict if you think about it. It can create conflicts in political ways. It can create divisiveness when it comes to who a person is, that they're just stuck in this one box and there can be nothing else to them but this. And so today, I believe it's really important to think of Rahab from this holistic picture of who she was, and maybe from God's eyes more than our own eyes, taking off the labels and being able to see the woman and see her heart and see her personhood. Oftentimes we see other people the way the world has chosen to see us. So if we feel like we've been victimized, if we feel like people have seen us in a way that we are racialized or over sexualized, then we can tend to take on that character or take on that character assessment and begin to see other people with the same lack of grace. But there is hope. The fact is that no one is perfect, but God gives people grace and a second chance over and over again, even when they do not deserve it, even when they have been written off by the world. Do you know what it's like to be written off? Maybe not by the whole world, but maybe you were written off as a child that had ADHD and put a label on you, or you were written off by your family as the bad kid, or you were written off by society or your school as the one that would never be able to be intelligent and get a degree. We all know at some point what it's like to be written off by other people. In this text, we're introduced to a beautiful woman that I believe was written off. Before we get to verse 1, she had lived a whole life, right? We know she's an adult woman. We don't know anything about her childhood. We don't know what she went through growing up, but we do know one thing. One thing that this probably male author made sure we knew is that Rahab was sexualized. She was a prostitute. And so we're introduced to probably someone that was physically appealing because she was a prostitute, known for her outward appearance and for her body, who had a choice to, number one, this woman had a choice to believe in God or not believe in God. And, you know, have you ever heard someone say, I can't go to church because people like me can't walk into a church? Maybe it would have been 10 times harder for people like Rahab to feel like, who am I? Think about the boldness it took for her to even say, I believe in God, in a world that probably wrote her off as someone that didn't fit into a spiritual dimension. So she had a choice to believe in God or not believe in God, and to allow society to define if she was allowed to believe in God or not. And number two, she had a choice to help God's spies and to turn God's spies away. Number three, she had a choice to follow God or choose not to follow God, committing her family to Yahweh. We all are given choices regardless of how others define us. We have the ability as humans to be creative and to self-define and to resist what the culture or status quo says. Rahab chose to see herself, I believe, as more than a prostitute before anyone else in the world saw that. Or else she wouldn't have been able to do what we just read in verse 1 through 13. Rahab chose to follow God and to position her family to believe in the God of the Israelites. And we know that because in Hebrews 11, verse 31, it says that Rahab's greatest redemptive characteristic was faith, which beckoned her to be hospitable as a woman of God. She wouldn't even have been able to be hospitable to the spies if she didn't have great faith in their God. Her faith empowered her. Rahab, a woman that was known for her great character, was also characterized in the text as a prostitute. We don't know Rahab's story. Was she born into poverty? Is that why she needed to prostitute herself? Did her parents put her into prostitution to pay for their debt? We see that happen around the world right now. But we tend to blame Rahab before we even know her story. Was she an orphan left to fend for herself? And she had no other options in a society that didn't give jobs and opportunity to women? Were her parents on drugs? Was she forced into sexual slavery? Or was it her choice? Was her mother in debt? What caused Rahab to be placed in a position where she had to sell her body? There's no woman I know that just does that because they want to. And her womanhood to provide for her sustenance. Yet her womanhood, strikingly, is then used to create a hospitable environment for the people of God as they're looking for safety and they're looking for covering. Rahab chooses to use the very thing that the world deemed horrendous in her life as the thing that she would use to save the people of God. Rahab chooses to use her home, much like Jael, to protect God's people while warding away the enemies of Israel. Rahab was a prostitute. She was seen as less than the margins of society, the least likely to be chosen, but God chose to see her heart. God knew that Rahab had greater faith than anyone else around. Rahab, God saw differently than the people saw Rahab. I want to ask you right now to think about how God sees you. Has God shown you? I know early on, God showed me scriptures about my calling. And if I would have told anybody, it would have been like Joshua. They would have said, no way you're going to do this. No way you're going to be this. No way God will call you into this. But I dare you to see yourself the way God shows you. She was least likely to be chosen by the world, even the godly people, the church folk, the believers, but she was the first to be chosen by God. Maybe today you know what it's like to be the last on the list. Can you remember a time our good God looked beyond your faults and saw your need? God equips the disqualified and God calls them anyway. God sees not only your imperfection, not only your sins, but God sees your redemptive characteristics, and we all have them. And God sees the goodness in you. So don't give up on yourself just yet. In the South Asian Bible commentary, theologians wrote about how Rahab reminds us that God indeed does still use women all over the world to do God's work, regardless of whether they have a PhD or they have a special seat at the table. God didn't even need Rahab to be in a synagogue or a church building to do God's work. He didn't need her to be in the church house praising. All God needed Rahab to do was have faith and be obedient. And the same goes for you and I. In the same way, God uses children and people who barely made it into a D program. They got in like I did on academic probation, having to have someone every week look over their shoulder to see if they could continue. Those are the ones who were once strung out on drugs or stuck in a lifestyle of gangbanging, but yet and still God chose to say, I'm going to erase all that past. And I dare someone to challenge my choice on who I want to use. I want you to listen to this story in this commentary on how God chooses to use a woman now named Sathama in Andhra Pradesh, India. Women are often despised in South Asia, but God has used them to accomplish God's purposes, and God still uses women today. For example, the story is told of a woman named Sathama who led the entire village of Dubagantu in the Nellore region of Andhra Pradesh in a fight against the sale of Iraq. Iraq is an alcoholic drink, which is popular among men in rural India. And it's often illicitly distilled and mixed with toxic substances that have resulted in many deaths. Sathama's story mobilized these women, again, not in a church building, to take a stand against the illicit liquor, creating an awareness of its dangers and eventually bringing about significant change in the lives of many in Andhra Pradesh. All this is evidence of the truth of Paul's words that God chooses the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. That's 1 Corinthians 1:28-29. Despite the fact that Sathama was a prostitute and Sathama was a woman in South Asia and Rahab was a prostitute. Rahab is situated in the text of Hebrews next to the greatest heroes and heroines of the faith. She's regarded as a hero. The writer of the book of Hebrews includes Rahab's name in the list of those that were saved by faith. And her name also appears in the genealogy of Jesus. Can you imagine that? For she became one of Yeshua's ancestors in Matthew 1:5. Who we still call a prostitute. You can look in your Bible and say Rahab the prostitute in headlines. You can look at devotionals, it will still say Rahab the prostitute. You can hear sermons, even mine, it will say Rahab the prostitute. Yet God sees her as an ancestor that has been redeemed by Yeshua. God sees her as a great woman of faith. God sees her as a heroine that instituted the Israelites being able to move forward into their identity as a people of God. In efforts to save God's people, Rahab operated out of the spirit of three things: cooperation, bold hospitality, and civil disobedience. Let's talk about those 3 points and then we'll close. Amen. Let's talk about cooperation. Rahab was willing to work with the spies in Joshua 2 and to act out of survival to protect all their lives. In verse 4, we see Rahab take these men and Rahab hides them. This took both the willingness of these men to be hidden in a place that people could have mocked them for going to simply due to association with a prostitute. Have you ever thought about that? These men had to be willing to be associated with a woman that no one wanted to be associated with in order to be saved. There was mutual cooperation occurring, mutual obedience to God occurring, mutual submission occurring in this moment. Rahab was willing to create a safe place for these men, even though they were not her people by blood. There was all the reason for Rahab to say, oh, no, you can't come here. In verse 6, she leads the men to the roof and she hides them in a stalk of flax she had piled together on the roof. Rahab chooses to use what she has at her disposal. How many times have we said, God, I don't have this degree. I don't have this platform. I don't have enough people following me. I don't have the personality. I'm not strong enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not smart enough. But Rahab, this is why God loved Rahab so much and was so amazed by Rahab, because she had all the reason, more than most of us, to say, God, I can't do this. And she never once, even more than Moshe, who said, I can't do this, and gave all his reasons. Rahab never once said, I can't do this, God. Rahab went forth by faith courageously and cooperated with the Spirit. She used her home, her flax, her Ruth, her mind, even the home where she was probably prostituting in for God, and her words to cooperate not only with Joshua's 2 men, but with Yahweh. Sometimes I wonder if Rahab did this better because she wasn't surrounded by church folk. They weren't around her to put in her head that you're not enough and you can't do this and judge her. So she was able to step out and do it. This mutual cooperative relationship, this uniting of the minds, this sort of civil disobedience led to all of their lives being saved. Even though the king of Jericho was sending spies to come to Rahab's home, she defied the government for reasons of conscience. Perhaps there's someone God is calling you to cooperate with today that doesn't make sense in the natural to cooperate with, to enter into a relationship with, to save you both from the evil of the day. With war going on in Israel and the persecution of believers in Pakistan and India and Nigeria and the Middle East, with Black lives in America under attack disproportionately and more, we can be blessed by acts of cooperation. What does it look like for Pakistanis and for Indians to cooperate together? What's it look like for Christians and Muslims to cooperate against evil together? Because not all Muslims are part of Hamas and bombing and violently oriented. There's stories of Muslims and Christians coming together and fasting and praying to see peace in their land. Just this week, I learned of the cooperative acts that have been going on for centuries between groups like the African American Civil Rights Leadership and the Asian American community. Did you know that Asian Americans came out with that name? They received the strategy and the very name Asian American from African Americans during the Black Power movement. Africans and Asians have been working together in their continents to create forums in Africa, both addressing their respective challenges for centuries. But why aren't people talking about the cooperation happening? That's not making the news. On a personal note, there may be someone you are called to forgive. to work with, to help mothers, those in foster cares, those that are in need in your village for water, pastors who need financial support, or women experiencing domestic violence. I met a beautiful woman yesterday, Indian woman here in America, who she's given her life to helping people with divorce care and that are coming out of domestic violence. And I said to her, let's cooperate. Let's work together. Here in the center, in the building I'm in right now, there's a Haitian church across the hall, and there's an African-American church on the bottom level, and there's a new ministry that just came in the back that helps people get their citizenship when they come into our nation. I said, let's cooperate together. How can we work together? How can we converge to make a stronger difference? I think there's an African proverb that talks about how you will get further when you cooperate. It will take longer, but you'll get further when you cooperate than when you do it alone. You'll get there much faster alone, but you'll get further in a group. Cooperation is so important. So is God calling you to cooperate in even more personal ways? We've taken it from the world and we've taken it to cooperating organizationally, but what about when God tells you to cooperate at home? Is God calling you to cooperate with your wife by listening more attentively or changing your tonality? Is God calling you to cooperate at work by being willing to give the worker who's never recognized the voice of encouragement or approval? Is God calling you to cooperate with your children more by hearing out their struggles and finding ways to work together? I think in parenting, oftentimes there's just this power dynamic that parents just tell their kids what to do. And wouldn't we get further if we cooperated and found ways to get the children involved in their own development, to help them realize their goals rather than simply barking orders at them? Is God calling you to cooperate with your enemies by turning the other cheek? Having a hard conversation or being the first to say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Let's try to reconcile. Cooperation is a powerful gift that's oftentimes underestimated. If you haven't yet, go back and watch the last message I posted on my page on Matthew 18. Cooperation is a gift, but heals and it delivers brokenness. If and only if we are willing to put aside our differences and act together for the most vulnerable and marginalized in the world. So Rahab modeled cooperation, but secondly, Rahab modeled bold hospitality. Rahab was boldly hospitable in the face of great danger. It's easy to be hospitable when nothing's wrong and everybody likes you. It's something else to bring somebody else that has a death decree and is on wanted ads, right? These two spies were on wanted ads in their nation, and the king was sending the police to her house. Let me put this in modern day terms. The king was sending the world power was sending the police, or not the world power, but they were sending the police to her house to say, hey, look, and this wasn't like our government today. This king could have just been like, she's done. We don't need a legal process or nothing. Kill her. And the police are knocking on her door, and she put her whole life on the line to be hospitable. We oftentimes really underestimate the holiness of hospitality. The holiness of hospitality biblically. What's it look like to be hospitable to the foreigner in your land, whether they're illegal or not? What's it look like to be, because they were illegally, these two spies were illegally in the land. They were not registered. They did not have citizenship, and they were not supposed to be there. And the government was saying, get them out. But she still found a way to be a safe haven for them. She could have lost her life, but she risked it, leading her and her family not to destruction. Everything in the natural said, oh, she about to die. How is one woman going to hide from the whole government? And everybody already knew they was there, because they were coming to her house saying, excuse me, behold, men from the sons of Israel have come to spy on our land. Bring out the men who came to your house last night. They had the CIA coming to her house already. They already knew the report. They saw them. They had them caught on video. And she still said, oh, no, they're not here. Rahab believed and had revelation that Adonai had given the Israelites the land by saying in verse 9 and 13, I know the Lord gave you the land. Remember, she said, I saw all that the God of Israel did. And everybody here is like, oh, snap, he's not to be played with. We see that in verse 9 to 13. And then she begged, please just save my house. Save my daddy, save my mama, save my brothers, save everything that we all have and deliver my soul because I know what's about to happen. Rahab knew she could have been killed by the king of Jericho, but she was more afraid of being killed by the King of Kings. Like the Hebrew midwives in Exodus, Rahab chose to fear God more than people, more than the king. Even people that are powerful, God can protect you from. Amen. Last night I had the opportunity to sit next to an Indian pastor's wife, and she lamented for 45 minutes, at least 30. She lamented and went on and on about how bad it is in India right now, and the government, and how people are being persecuted, and they're coming against them. And right now there's a whole law that's being put in place, and elections are coming, and they're trying to enforce a law against Christians in her nation. And I said, I will call a fast for you. We will pray and cry out that it will not become more unbearable. She said 300 of the pastors in her network are in jail right now, and their wives are trying to figure out how to take care of themselves day to day. But God can shift the whole government. So you know what I told her? I told her about my people. I said, you know what? We were in bondage. We were in slavery, not only physical slavery, but we were persecuted as Christians in America. And we were told we couldn't read the Bible. And when we got a Bible, we got a slave Bible. And that Bible omitted all these scriptures. So we couldn't really read anything about the Exodus and deliverance and freedom. And so we had to hide under these big, huge cast iron pots to pray in the middle of the night. And we had to go out into the brush harbor and the deep woods and worship in the middle of the night and do shouting circles. And I said, if God could make it that it's legal for us to pray and worship and preach the gospel here in America, then God can do it in India. And she was just so inspired. So boldness, bold hospitality. Think of all the people in America that had to hide people, slaves, enslaved people in their houses. Bold hospitality. Illegally. This wise choice of Rahab to fear God, providing bold, courageous hospitality to Joshua's 2 spies. Her prophetic insight into what was about to occur. You know, some people, it could be written on the wall and they still can't see the writing. But Rahab saw prophetically. Did you ever think of Rahab as a prophet? She had prophetic insight of what was about to happen that caused her to make provision for not only the spies, but she was smart. She said, it's not enough to save y'all. I need to make sure that we make a pact today. Save my house, save my mom, save my father, save my brother, save everything. Rahab may have looked one-dimensional to people. Now, after all this, I want you to think about, how do you see Rahab now? Is she just a prostitute? Is she just a prostitute when I just explained all that? She may have looked one-dimensional to people, a fallen harlot, but she housed much more. That was not who she was. No, Rahab was a lover of God. She was a faithful daughter, a sister, a friend to the people of God. She was wise and shrewd in her affairs and how she handled conflict. In verse 1, when the spies came to her home, she housed these men. She covered these men. She hid these men in verse 6. She created a safe place for these men to sleep in verse 8. She spoke up for these men in verse 4 to 5. Rahab's bold hospitality came out of her refusal to allow her emotions to get the best of her, or fear to consume her in a great time of conflict. So today we're going to close on those 2 points. We'll hit point 3 at a later time. Today I want to encourage you to evaluate where fear may be trying to stop you from being like Rahab, from being obedient, to take a leap of faith for God. Even if it's going to cost you something or everything, it's worth it.
Is God telling you to sell your home, to leave your job, to stay at your job, to stay in the city you're in, to homeschool your kids or put your kids in public school, to stay in a place that consistently keeps pushing you out of your comfort zone or telling you to come back and rest and to be at peace? Is God telling you to leave a relationship or to stay in it and fight for your relationship? Is there something new that God is requiring of you in this season that takes courageous faith, courageous cooperation, courageous hospitality, like we see in Rahab's life? Like Rahab, you have the ability to be courageous, and God will fight for you. The safest place for you and I to be is where? In the will of God. I've lived in war zones. I visited and every single time that I've here,